We tend to think life, our big moments, even the day-to-day stuff, happens because of clear reasons, deliberate actions.
Right, cause and effect.
Yeah, exactly. But what if chance, random events, shape things way more than we realize, from personal turning points to, well, huge historical shifts?
That's pretty much the core idea in Brian Klaas's book, Fluke, Chance, Chaos, and Why Everything We Do Matters.
And that's what we're diving into today. It sounds like it really challenges how we like to explain things.
Oh, absolutely. Klaas argues against these neat, tidy stories we tell ourselves. He says these arbitrary accidental forces, they have a massive influence, much bigger than we usually admit.
So the key idea is that tiny random things can just blow up into huge consequences. For us, for the world, it's not just about luck then.
No, not just luck in the simple sense. Klaas uses fluke much more broadly.
Okay, let's unpack that. What does he mean by fluke?
He means anything contingent. Any point where a tiny, tiny change could send things down a completely different path.
Like a fork in the road.
Exactly like a fork in the road. The smallest nudge could decide which way you go.
Okay, and that connects to chaos theory, right? This idea of sensitivity to initial conditions. Sounds a bit technical.
It is a scientific term, yeah. But the basic idea is actually pretty simple. It just means that even a minuscule change right at the start can lead to, well, hugely different outcomes later on.
Like weather forecasting.
That's the classic example. A tiny difference in temperature, wind speed, anything in the initial data.
And the forecast for next week is completely different.
Totally different. That unpredictability comes right from that sensitivity.
And Klaas doesn't just talk about this in theory. It's personal for him too, isn't it? There's a family story.
Yeah, a really tragic one, actually. His own existence traces back to a fluke from 1905.
What happened?
His great-grandfather's first wife had a severe mental health crisis. She tragically killed their 4 children and then herself. It's awful.
Oh my God.
And it was because of that devastating event that his great-grandfather eventually remarried a few years later.
To Klaas's great-grandmother.
Exactly. So his own life is contingent on that earlier tragedy.
Wow. It's just a stark reminder of those ripple effects, isn't it? How one terrible, isolated event can just change everything down the line in ways nobody could predict.
It really makes you think. But then it raises a question, right? If tiny changes have such big impacts, why does life often feel so stable, so predictable?
Yeah, like the daily commute, the same coffee shop.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't always feel chaotic.
Right. And that's where Klaas brings in contingent convergence.
Contingent convergence sounds like a balance between the chaos and the order.
That's a good way to put it. The idea is, okay, small flukes can push us onto new paths, sure. But once you're on that path, certain kinds of order tend to, well, take over.
Like what?
Like solutions at work tend to stick around. Think about traffic flow on a highway. There's a general pattern, a convergence towards certain speeds and behaviors, mostly predictable.
But
then you still get those contingent events, like a sudden car accident, that can just completely derail everything for someone. A massive change in trajectory.
So order emerges, but it's punctuated by these flukes that can change everything. Okay, I think I get that. You mentioned a story from the book about a vacation.
Ah, yes, this one's fascinating. It's about Mr. and Mrs. H.M. Stimson taking a trip to Kyoto, Japan, back in 1926. Just a holiday. They enjoyed the city.
Okay, seems normal enough.
But fast forward 19 years. 1945. Mr. Stimson, Henry Stimson, is now the U.S. Secretary of War.
The Secretary of War, and he's overseeing...
He's overseeing the selection of targets for the atomic bombs.
Wait, so his vacation in 1926?
Directly influenced the bombing targets. The target committee actually thought Kyoto was the obvious choice. Strategic.
Because of its military value or something.
Yeah, industrial and military significance. It was top of their list. But Stimson remembered his trip, how much he liked Kyoto, its cultural importance.
Oh, he stepped in.
He did. He argued against it, persuaded President Truman twice to take Kyoto off the list, because he'd had a nice vacation there almost 2 decades earlier.
That is absolutely incredible. So Hiroshima and Nagasaki were chosen instead, partly because of a pleasant holiday memory.
Largely because of that memory. And the randomness doesn't stop there. The second bomb, the one dropped on Nagasaki,
Yeah.
it was actually meant for a city called Kokura.
So why Nagasaki?
Clouds. Thick cloud cover over Kokura obscured the target, so the bomber flew onto the secondary target, which was Nagasaki.
So a vacation and a cloud are the direct reasons why those specific cities were destroyed and hundreds of thousands died there instead of somewhere else.
When you boil it down to the immediate trigger,
Yes.
a vacation and the weather.
It's staggering, these invisible pivots, as Klaas calls them, things we'd never normally factor into grand historical narratives.
Exactly. We focus on strategy, politics, big forces. But these tiny, seemingly irrelevant details, a trip, some clouds, they get written out. But they were decisive at that moment.
Is that where Kokura's luck comes from?
That's the phrase in Japan, yes. Referring to that sheer chance of escaping annihilation because of cloud cover.
These invisible pivots. It makes you wonder about your own life, doesn't it? All those tiny moments that could have sent you down a different road entirely, like that movie.
Sliding doors?
Yeah, sliding doors, missing the train versus catching it.
It's a perfect illustration that one tiny moment splits a life into two completely different paths. But we only ever live once, so we usually don't see how much those little things mattered.
Until maybe something huge happens and you can trace it back. Like that story about Joseph Lott on 9/11.
Oh, that's a powerful one. He was late going to a conference at the World Trade Center. Why? Because his shirt was wrinkled.
A wrinkled shirt.
Yeah, he decided to change it.
Yeah.
Then, at breakfast, his colleague Elaine Greenberg gave him a Monet tie as a gift. He almost went straight up then. She pointed out it clashed with the green shirt he'd put on. So he went back to his hotel room again, this time to iron a white shirt. And while he was ironing, looking out the window, he saw the first plane hit the tower.
Oh my God. And Elaine.
She'd already gone up to the conference on the 101st floor. She didn't survive.
A wrinkled shirt? A tie? A color clash? Literally the difference between life and death.
Exactly. And Lott apparently really struggled with people saying everything happens for a reason.
I can absolutely understand that. How could you possibly think there was a reason his colleagues died and he lived because of ironing? It feels so arbitrary.
Deeply arbitrary. And that gets right to the heart of this tension Klaas writes about. We feel like we're in control, like our choices drive everything.
But then there's all this randomness, this chaos playing a huge role.
Right. And Klaas puts it very starkly. We control nothing, but we influence everything.
We control nothing but influence everything. What does that mean exactly?
It means that illusion of direct control is mostly just that, an illusion. But our actions, our choices, they still have consequences. They ripple outwards. We just can't predict or control exactly what those ripples will do.
And believing we are in control, or that everything has a neat reason, that leads us astray.
Yeah, he argues it leads to misunderstandings, cognitive mistakes even. We try to find signals in what is often just noise.
But he says that noise, those seemingly unimportant details.
That's often where the really consequential stuff comes from.
Yeah.
So accepting limited control, but recognizing our influence is the key shift. Believing everything happens for a reason can actually blind us to how things really work.
It feels like our brains fight against that idea, though. This need for order, for explanations. Klaas talks about history, right? How we've resisted randomness.
Oh yeah, big time. Think about it from ancient religions seeing divine hands everywhere to early science picturing the universe like a perfect clock.
Everything ticking along predictably.
Exactly. There's always been this drive for elegant, deterministic explanations. The idea that things could just happen by chance, contingently, it kind of clashes with that deep-seated need for order.
And evolution plays a role here, too. Why we see patterns everywhere.
Definitely. Imagine being a hunter-gatherer. Hearing rustling in the grass could be predator, could be wind.
Better assume it's a predator.
Safer bet, right.
Yeah.
So we evolved to be pattern-detecting machines. Over-detecting patterns was less risky than missing a real threat.
So we're basically hardwired to find meaning and patterns even when it's just random noise.
Pretty much. Which makes it hard to accept that sometimes stuff just happens. We want the story, the reason.
It's like the time travel warning in sci-fi, isn't it? Don't step on the butterfly.
Perfect analogy. We totally accept that one tiny change in the past could rewrite the future.
But we don't think about how our actions right now are doing the same thing.
We often ignore it, yeah. But that chain of cause and effect, it's always running. Our smallest actions are constantly reshaping what comes next, even if we can't see how.
He also contrasts different cultural views on this, right? Individualism versus interconnectedness.
Yes, he's quite critical of the strong Western focus on individualism, this idea that we're these self-contained units fully in charge of our destiny.
Which feels good, but maybe isn't accurate.
He argues it's fundamentally inaccurate. He points to more Eastern philosophies that emphasize how interconnected everything is. He uses this incredible story, Ivan the swimmer.
What happened to Ivan?
He was struggling, drowning far out at sea, when suddenly a soccer ball floats by. He grabs it, it saves his life.
Okay, lucky break.
But where did the ball come from? It turned out it was kicked off a cliff 80 miles away by some kids playing. Kids he'd never met, would never meet.
80 miles.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. A completely random connection saved his life.
Exactly. A perfect, bizarre illustration of unseen interconnectedness. And think about the pandemic one infection, somewhere specific.
And it spreads to billions globally.
Yeah, it hammers home that idea again. We control nothing, but we influence everything. Our actions, even small ones, can have vast, unforeseen effects on people we don't even know.
So how does science look at this? You mentioned contingency and convergence earlier, especially in evolution.
Right, evolutionary biology gives us great examples. Contingency is like the asteroid hitting the Earth 66 million years ago.
Wiped out the dinosaurs.
Exactly. A massive chance event. If it had missed or hit the ocean differently, the whole history of life, human history, would be completely different or non-existent. That's contingency on a grand scale.
Okay, and convergence.
Convergence is when different paths lead to similar solutions because those solutions just work. Think about eyes.
Eyes.
Human eyes and octopus eyes are remarkably similar in structure, right? Camera-like.
Yeah, they are.
But our last common ancestor was probably some tiny worm-like thing hundreds of millions of years ago. We evolved eyes independently.
Because having that kind of eye is just a really good way to see the world.
Precisely. Nature arrived at a similar solution twice, down completely separate paths. That's convergence.
Klaas uses the snooze button analogy too, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's a simple, everyday way to think about it. Hitting snooze creates an alternate timeline for your morning.
5 more minutes.
Right. Anything that happens regardless of whether you hit snooze or not, that's convergent. Your need for coffee, maybe. But if those 5 minutes mean you miss a specific phone call, or catch a different bus, or bump into someone you otherwise wouldn't have.
That's contingency, a small change leading to a different sequence of events.
Exactly. And Klaas's point is that contingency, these unseen alternative paths, branching off from tiny decisions, plays a much bigger role than we think.
It's kind of like stuff happens versus everything happens for a reason.
That's a good way to sum it up. And we seem psychologically more okay with attributing good things to random stuff happens, but we really resist thinking that bad things might just be contingent, random. We crave a reason for suffering.
He also uses that metaphor of life being like a thread in a tapestry.
It's a really evocative image. Physics tells us there's this unbroken chain of cause and effect, right, from the Big Bang onward.
Everything connected.
So imagine our lives as threads woven into this immense cosmic tapestry. If you pull on one thread, even a little bit,
Whole picture changes.
the whole pattern shifts. Our lives aren't isolated. They're tied into everyone else's, stretching back through generations, back to these incredibly improbable evolutionary flukes.
Like mitochondria, how cells got power plants.
Yeah, or that ancient viral infection that gave mammals the gene for the placenta. These wild, random events in the deep past that literally made us possible.
It connects back to his personal story, too. The worst moments potentially linked to the best.
It does. It challenges those very individualistic narratives, like the American dream idea that you pull yourself up by your bootstraps alone.
Yeah.
The science points towards profound interconnectedness.
Okay, this inevitably brings us to the butterfly effect, right? And trying to
Mhm.
predict the future.
Can't avoid it when talking chaos. Edward Lorenz, the meteorologist, his discovery really kicked off chaos theory.
The rounding errors in his weather model.
Yeah, he reran a simulation, but typed in slightly rounded numbers like 0.506 instead of 0.506,127. Tiny difference.
And the results.
Completely different weather patterns emerged just a short way into the simulation. It showed how even imperceptible changes could lead to massive divergence. That's the butterfly effect in action. Long-term prediction becomes impossible.
So Laplace's demon, that idea of a perfect mind, knowing everything, predicting everything.
It's a neat thought experiment, but it bumps up against reality. One, you can never know the position and momentum of every single particle perfectly. Two, chaos theory shows even if you could, tiny imprecisions amplify wildly. And three, quantum mechanics might introduce fundamental indeterminism anyway.
So predicting the future with certainty is basically off the table.
Pretty much, according to physics as we understand it now.
The world's just too complex, which leads to complex systems theory and these basins of attraction. You mentioned a sandpile.
Right, complex systems are everywhere. Ecosystems, economies, societies. They have diverse parts, they're interconnected, they adapt. The sandpile model is a great way to picture self-organized criticality.
Adding grains of sand one by one.
Yeah, you add grains, nothing much happens for a while, the pile grows, but it reaches a point, a critical state.
Where one more grain causes a huge avalanche.
Exactly. The system organizes itself to the edge of chaos, where tiny inputs can trigger massive outputs. And Klaas argues that's what we often do with our modern systems.
How so?
We optimize everything for maximum efficiency, just-in-time supply chains, for example. We build these incredibly complex, tightly coupled systems.
Making them like very steep, unstable sand piles.
That's the argument. They become super fragile, prone to collapse from small shocks. We then call these collapses black swans, like they're totally unpredictable bolts from the blue.
But maybe they're built into the system.
Klaas suggests there are often inherent consequences of designing systems right at that critical edge for the sake of efficiency. He contrasts it with something like the South American power grid, which is less efficient overall, but more resilient because it's broken into more independent parts.
So, black swans. We hear that term a lot, thanks to Taleb. Rare, unpredictable, high-impact events.
That's the definition. Though whether something like the pandemic truly qualifies is debated. But the core idea is these massive surprises. There's also this concept of critical slowing down.
A warning sign.
Potentially. In some natural systems, as they approach a tipping point, they recover more slowly from small disturbances. Fluctuations don't damp down as quickly. It might be an early indicator of instability.
But the main point is, even if we can't tame black swans, the way we build our modern world might make them more likely or their impacts much bigger and faster.
Precisely. This relentless drive for optimization, for efficiency above all else, ironically creates more vulnerability to these shocks, market crashes, pandemics, attacks.
Understanding this complexity seems to poke holes in how we traditionally study social change, too.
Klaas points out several flawed assumptions often baked into social science. First, this idea of clear, single causes for big events.
Like the atomic bomb decision, it wasn't just Stimson's vacation.
Right, countless factors contributed. Second, assuming you understand the whole system just by understanding its parts. A watch is complicated. You can understand it piece by piece. Traffic is complex. Knowing about each car doesn't tell you how the whole flow will behave.
And relying on the past to predict the future? That seems increasingly shaky.
Very shaky. The world changes. Climate change is a prime example. Past weather patterns aren't a reliable guide anymore. Or the Arab Spring theory is about regime stability looked right until suddenly they weren't because the underlying conditions shifted. Old data, old models fail.
And the linearity assumption, small cause, small effect.
Yeah, complex systems are often nonlinear. Tiny things can have huge effects, like the sandpile grain. Maybe we stuck with linear models because historically that's all we could compute easily. Our thinking needs to catch up.
Plus, everyone stays in their academic silos.
That doesn't help either. You need a more holistic view to grasp complex change.
All this makes it really hard to maintain that illusion of control, doesn't it? Despite our routines feeling so stable.
That's the mirage of regularity, as he calls it. Day-to-day life feels predictable, but look at the 21st century. 9/11, the 2008 crash, Arab Spring, Trump, Brexit, the pandemic, event after event just shatters forecasts.
We're bad at predicting the big stuff.
We really are. We face radical uncertainty, things we can't even imagine happening yet. Think about predicting 2020 phone usage back in 1995. Impossible.
So we need to be smarter about what we try to predict.
Maybe distinguish between questions we have to try and answer, like a medical diagnosis, versus those where long-range prediction is basically futile, like detailed economic forecasts years out.
But accepting this uncertainty, this lack of total control, it's not all bad news.
No, Klaas argues there's an upside. It can be quite liberating, actually.
How so?
Well, it makes space for serendipity, for joy in the unexpected. And crucially, it can free us from constantly blaming ourselves when things go wrong.
Because it might not actually be your fault. It could just be fluke.
Often, yeah. It helps you take setbacks less personally. Focus more on enjoying the ride, influencing things positively where you can, making things better for others, rather than striving for this impossible level of control.
He also has this interesting idea about an inversion of stability, comparing us to prehistoric people.
It's a neat contrast. Hunter-gatherers had lots of local instability, danger, uncertainty day to day. But their global context, the world itself, changed very slowly over generations.
And for us?
It's flipped. We crave and create immense local stability, predictable routines, Starbucks on every corner, ordering online. But our global systems are incredibly unstable, rapidly changing due to technology, hyperconnectivity, optimization.
Like the Suez Canal blockage causing global ripples.
Perfect example. One ship stuck, and supply chains worldwide seize up. He argues our world is increasingly vulnerable to being upended by flukes, leading to this string of unpredictable 21st century calamities. Maybe we need less optimization, more resilience, more serendipity locally, and aim for more stability globally.
This focus on control also fuels his criticism of the self-help industry.
Oh yeah, he takes aim at that quite directly. The whole manifest your destiny, you are solely responsible for your success narrative.
Like The Secret. Just think positive thoughts.
Exactly. He finds that deeply misleading because it ignores the massive role of luck and circumstance. It also has really problematic implications when you think about historical injustice. It implicitly blames victims for things entirely outside their control.
So what's the alternative message?
It's more nuanced. Strive, work hard, yes, but also acknowledge luck. Take a bit less credit when you succeed, and assign a lot less blame to yourself and others when things go wrong. It's more realistic and arguably more compassionate.
Okay, deep breath. Where does all this leave the big question? Free will.
The perennial question. Klaas is pretty clear on his stance. He leans towards hard determinism.
Meaning, no free will.
Essentially, yes. The idea is that the mind is a product of the brain is physical, and physical processes follow chains of cause and effect. There's no separate you pulling the strings independently.
He uses an example from his childhood.
Yeah, being obsessed with Gettysburg. He felt drawn to it, not like he consciously chose the obsession out of infinite options. He briefly outlines the main philosophical camps.
Libertarian free will, we have real choice. Compatibilism, determinism and free will coexist somehow.
Right, which he critiques as wanting to have your cake and eat it too, like a puppet liking its strings. And then hard determinism, which accepts determinism and concludes free will, is an illusion.
Does quantum mechanics change anything? That randomness at the quantum level?
He acknowledges it adds a wrinkle, potential indeterminism. But for him, even if there's randomness, it doesn't equate to free will in the sense of conscious authorship of our choices. Ultimately, though, he says how you interpret it is quite personal.
This focus on luck and lack of total control also affects how we should think about genius, especially when it comes to, say, billionaires.
Absolutely. He pushes back hard against the easy equation.
Yeah.
Immense wealth. Immense genius.
Because wealth isn't normally distributed like height.
Exactly. Height follows a bell curve. Wealth has this incredibly long tail. A few people have vastly more than everyone else. That kind of distribution usually points to luck playing a huge role, not just talent.
There was a simulation he mentioned?
Yeah, economists and physicists simulated a system with people of varying talent, normally distributed, and random lucky-unlucky events. Who ended up at the very top?
Not necessarily the most talented?
Nope. Often it was people who are, pretty talented, maybe slightly above average, but who just got consistently lucky breaks over time. Talent gets you in the game, but extreme success often requires extreme luck.
So we shouldn't automatically assume someone like Elon Musk is a genius in everything just because he's incredibly wealthy.
Klaas uses him as an example. Clearly talented in certain areas, engineering, business vision perhaps. But success also involves timing, funding, great teams, market conditions, and maybe some helpful overconfidence or greed, which aren't necessarily genius traits. The correlation between talent and extreme wealth is very imperfect. We infer genius backwards from the outcome.
Okay, last big topic. Conspiracy theories. Why do people fall for them, according to this framework?
It ties back directly to those cognitive biases we talked about earlier. Our brains are hungry for explanations, especially for big, shocking events.
So, first bias, narrative bias.
Yeah, we love a good story. Conspiracy theories offer compelling, often simple narratives with clear heroes, villains, causes, and effects. Reality is often messy, random, complicated, less satisfying story-wise.
Second, magnitude bias.
We feel like big events must have big causes. The idea that something huge like the Arab Spring could be kicked off by one guy setting himself on fire, or Princess Diana dying in a mundane car crash, it feels disproportionate. A conspiracy provides a suitably big cause.
And third, teleological bias.
The belief that things happen for a reason, for a purpose. Conspiracy theories scratch that itch. They suggest events aren't random, but part of some hidden plan or plot, which can feel more comforting, in a strange way, than pure, meaningless chance.
So conspiracies feed our need for story, proportionality, and purpose. That makes them hard to debunk.
Very hard. You're fighting a compelling story with, well, often with complex facts, or the unsatisfying answer that it was just random or it's complicated. And the modern internet, social media,
Just pours fuel on the fire.
it allows these theories to spread like wildfire through many-to-many communication, bypassing traditional gatekeepers. It creates echo chambers and contributes to polarization where people end up living in different factual realities.
So those three biases again: magnitude, big events need big causes; narrative, we want a story; and teleological, we want a reason.
That's the trio. Conspiracy theories offer a big reason, a neat story, and a sense of hitting purpose, hitting all those buttons.
And tackling them means...
It's tough. Cleaning up information channels helps. Detailed fact checks that actually engage with the conspiracy narrative might be better than just stating facts. But ultimately, acknowledging why they appeal psychologically is key.
Wow. Okay, so wrapping this all up. The big takeaway from Fluke seems to be, well, that fluke, chance, randomness, it's a much bigger part of the story of our lives and history than we usually care to admit.
Yeah, that illusion of being fully in control or everything having a neat reason, it's powerful, but it's largely misleading.
But it's not totally hopeless. We still have influence.
That's the crucial counterpoint.
Right.
We control almost nothing directly, perhaps. But our actions do matter. They ripple out. We influence everything, even if we can't predict exactly how. It's a call to act thoughtfully, but with humility about our ultimate control.
So a final thought maybe for you listening. Think about your own life. Can you spot any of those invisible pivots, those tiny moments, a chance meeting, a missed bus, a random decision that maybe, just maybe, set you on a completely different course than the one you might have otherwise traveled? What flukes shaped your reality, perhaps without you ever even noticing?
It really makes you reconsider things, doesn't it? The delicate dance between chance and consequence.